For 3 years, AI in design operated as a passive producer. You feed a prompt into an interface, and it returns a rigid, flat outcome. That raw output is rarely a publishable final product. Transforming it requires hours of manual post-processing, meticulously masking your subjects, correcting the final colors, and integrating complex typography. In June 2026, Adobe released an update to its Creative Cloud infrastructure that bypassed this manual bottleneck. This comparison illustrates the transition. On the left, basic text-to-image generation. On the right, AI scales outward into full project lifecycle management. Tedious tasks vanish. Resizing a master banner across 15 social media aspect ratios is executed with zero latency and zero error. This is achieved through an architecture known as Agentic AI. The key distinction here is step-by-step reasoning. These agents independently utilize specific software tools, evaluate the results, and self-correct when a step fails. The software transitions from a digital printing press waiting for a command into an autonomous digital employee actively working on a file. You no longer describe the exact image you want to see. Instead, you assign a broad macro objective. The core of digital production has shifted. Success is no longer about forcing an AI to render the perfect sequence of pixels. It requires mastering the orchestration of an agent across multiple applications. Consider a specific macro objective. You instruct the system to design a summer promotional campaign for a new sports shoe and ask it to prep the files for both vertical Instagram stories and horizontal highway billboards. The autonomous agent dissects the request into dozens of microtasks. First, it imports the photography and calculates alpha masks to remove the background. Next, it reconstructs physically accurate drop shadows. Finally, it generates scalable typography to overlay the promotional copy. The technical engine making this sequential logic possible is called spatial intelligence. The system maps the canvas as a series of mathematical functions, tracking z-index layers and vector coordinates with absolute precision. Because it comprehends spatial layout mathematically, the agent inherently knows that a text layer should never obscure a human subject's face. All of these structural, aesthetic decisions occur in the background, requiring no input from a mouse, a keyboard, or continuous human validation. Spatial intelligence elevates the machine from a blind generator into an autonomous art director, capable of making structurally sound decisions. Controlling layers within a single program is only the baseline. The true technical differentiation of Adobe's infrastructure becomes visible at the macro level. Adobe did not build an isolated AI tool that lives inside a browser window. They hardwired their inference engine as a centralized brain directly into the code of their flagship applications. Software architects refer to this native integration as cross-app orchestration. The central node receives the raw video and splits the workload. Visual data routes to Premiere for precise color grading. Simultaneously, Audition scrubs the background wind noise. Finally, After Effects renders and applies dynamic lower third motion graphics to the timeline. The agent possesses a deep map of the ecosystem. It identifies the technical problem and automatically deploys the correct legacy application to solve it. By integrating the agent directly into the applications professionals already use, Adobe connected isolated islands of generation into a unified, automated continent of production. In 2026, Adobe faced immense competition from open-source node-based ecosystems like Comfy UI and standalone generators like Midjourney. But those open-source tools carried a strategic vulnerability for corporate users. They rely on unregulated training data sets scraped indiscriminately from the web, containing millions of copyrighted works. Adobe built its defensive moat around enterprise security. They trained their agents exclusively on the Adobe stock database and cleared public domain content. Because the data is clean, Adobe offers companies full intellectual property indemnification. If an asset faces a copyright claim, Adobe covers the legal costs. But resolving copyright only addresses part of the corporate risk. Autonomous agents operating at this speed introduce the massive risk of automated misinformation, scaled rapidly across global campaigns. Every file output applies a cryptographic metadata seal, acting as a digital nutrition label. Every micro-decision the agent makes is embedded into this tamper-evident ledger, allowing anyone to verify which elements were human-made and which were automated. While open-source models generate high-fidelity textures, they remain fragmented tools that require manual integration. By solving the orchestration problem and providing legal indemnity, Adobe has created a workflow that addresses the specific friction points of enterprise production. Deploying autonomous laborers natively into professional software forces a difficult question. Will this technology ultimately replace human graphic designers? For entry-level positions, the reality is stark. The traditional pixel pusher, the junior designer whose sole job was masking hair, is effectively dead. However, the remaining human talent moves upward, elevated to strategic director at the apex of this newly automated production pyramid. The total eradication of low-level software labor triggers a metamorphosis of the profession, rather than its extinction. The modern creative force acts as a conductor, orchestrating a complex symphony of autonomous digital laborers that execute the manual execution. This efficiency immediately breaks traditional agency business models. You cannot reliably bill a client on an hourly rate when a campaign that used to take 3 weeks is finalized in 4 hours. The industry is rapidly accelerating toward value-based pricing. Compensation is now tied directly to the strategic output and the strength of the ideas, rather than the hours spent clicking at a keyboard. This democratizes scale entirely. A one-person studio that masters cross-app orchestration can consistently output the volume and quality of a traditional 50-person agency. But the primary creative risk is complacency. Studios that relinquish their art direction and rely entirely on the AI's default logic will quickly drown in an uninspired sea of sameness. In this environment, a designer's value is defined by creative direction and prompt engineering. Manual software speed has become a secondary metric.